Welcome back, dear listener, to the shadow-strewn shelves of the Dark Tome. Volume 4 beckons with tales so chilling they freeze the very air you breathe. Dare to turn the page and unravel the macabre mysteries that lie inked in the whispers of the night. Just remember, once you open the tome, there's no going back. The darkness isn't just in the stories. It watches, it waits, it whispers your name. So, shall we begin? Cryptic Chronicles presents Lightening. We had just moved into a little ranch house in the suburbs. Storybook neighborhood, quiet, friendly neighbors, picket fences, the whole 9 yards. Suffice it to say that this was supposed to be a new start for me, a recently single dad, and my 3-year-old son. A time to move on from the previous year's drama and stress. I viewed the thunderstorm as a metaphor for this fresh start. One last show of theatrics before the dirt and grime of the past would be washed away. My son loved it anyway, even with the power out. It was the first big storm he'd ever seen. Flashes of lightning flooded the bare rooms of our house, imparting unpacked boxes with long creeping shadows, and he jumped and squealed as the thunder boomed. It was well past his bedtime before he'd finally settled down enough to go to sleep. The next morning, I found him awake in bed and smiling. "I watched the lightning at my window," he proudly announced. A few mornings later, he told me the same thing. "You're silly," I said. "It didn't storm last night. You were only dreaming." "Oh." He seemed somewhat disheartened. I ruffled his hair and told him not to worry. There should be another storm soon. Then it became a pattern. He would tell me how he watched the lightning outside his window at least twice a week, despite there being no storms. Recurring dreams of that first memorable thunderstorm, I figured. It's easy to hate myself in hindsight. Everybody assures me there's nothing I could have done, no way I could have known. But I'm supposed to be the guardian of my child, and these are useless words of comfort. I constantly relive that morning, making my coffee, pouring milk over my cereal, and picking up the newspaper to read about the paedophile local authorities had just arrested. It was front-page stuff. Apparently this guy would select a young target, usually a boy, stake out their house for a while, and take flash photos of them through their window while they slept. Sometimes he did more. My stomach sank as the connection was made. At the time, it was merely something from a child's imagination. In retrospect, it is the scariest thing I've ever heard. About a week before the predator was caught, my son came up to me in his pajamas. "Guess what?" he asked. "What?" "No more lightning at my window." I played along. "Oh, that's nice. It finally died down, huh?" "No, now it's in my closet. I've yet to see the photos police have collected." The first tale has ended. Let the silence settle. But don't get too comfortable. The Dark Tome has more secrets to share. Turn the page and let the unknown envelop you. Cryptic Chronicles presents Knocking. It started when I was 6 years old. I was in school, it was the middle of a reading lesson, and I needed to pee, badly. At that age, actually, a fair few kids still wet themselves, and I always got paranoid about embarrassing myself in public like that. I stuck my hand up and told Mrs. Zebby that I needed to use the bathroom. After the usual speech about how I should have gone at break, she gave me the key to the disabled access toilet, as it was the closest one to my classroom. It was the middle of 5th period, and the corridors were empty and seemed cavernous to me. I was a short, scrawny thing back then. I sometimes had trouble with doors, especially unlocking them, and I fumbled for a good minute or two in trying to get the blasted thing open. Anyway, as I sat on my porcelain throne, there came a knocking at the door. "Someone's in here?" I called, disgruntled at this disturbance. There came a pause, then the knocking resumed. It was faster now, more determined. "Wait a minute." The knocking slowed, and a voice replied, "Let me in. I need to come inside." The speaker's tone was thin and reedy. An adult I didn't recognize. I may have been 6, but I also had a fairly good understanding of bathroom etiquette, mainly that you didn't let more than one person into an area only slightly larger than a cupboard. Go away! The knocking intensified again until it was a frantic drumbeat, just a few feet from me and out of sight. I heard the voice shouting something, growing more and more desperate. Let me in! Just open the door, please! I was terrified by that point. The hammering and yelling was so loud, and yet nobody had come to investigate it. Eventually, my teacher came to find me, angry because I had been gone almost half an hour. When I refused open the door to let her in, she got a spare key from the receptionist and then took me to the headmaster's office and called my parents. I was suspended for the rest of the week. I never told anyone what happened. It was a few weeks before my next encounter with this phenomenon. I had just celebrated my 7th birthday, and my family were having a barbecue in my honor. It was a gloriously sunny day, but as soon as we'd set everything up in the allotments behind our house, the coal refused to light. My dad asked me to go and get some fire starters from the shed in the front garden. It was pretty cramped inside, and I wouldn't fit all the way, so I just opened it up, stood on tiptoes to reach the shelf holding my objective, then shut the door. As I turned away, a frantic knocking hit the other side of the door. Open up! I need to come through! This voice was not the one I'd heard the month before. It was deeper, more brooding and angry. I said nothing, and hurried away. I had no idea what was happening, but it frightened me. As I walked away, there came a final thump, like a fist being slammed against wood, and I heard his voice again. You little bastard, I'll rip your fucking teeth out. Let me through. I ran back to my party and spent the rest of the day glancing over my shoulder. As you might have guessed by now, there were a lot of these voices. I count at least 30 total. Every month or so, I used to get them, pleading to be let through doors. Almost always, it would be immediately after I shut the door behind me, as though these strange entities had been following me. I never told anyone, but to be honest, I kinda just got used to it. It always made me jump, and some of the voices would make me feel uneasy. But I knew that I was safe, so long as I did not open the door. Some of the voices I got used to the extent that I even named them. There was one which always used to appear at my front door. At home, we have frosted glass, and I could see a silhouette of an average-sized man wearing a cap of some kind. He never spoke, but occasionally would push envelopes containing blank pieces of paper through the letterbox. I called him the postman. He was one of the more unsettling ones. If I tried to speak to him, he would look up sharply, then begin knocking. I generally left the postman alone. 20 years on, and I have retained as much normality as possible. I have plenty of friends, and I even have an on-and-off relationship with a girl I met last year. Not bad for a guy who wakes up in the middle of the night and listens intently to noises you can't hear on the other side of the door. Yeah, my buddies think I'm strange and kooky, but they put up with it. They're all great. I'll miss them. You see, things have started to get strange. Well, stranger than usual, I suppose. 3 weeks ago, I awoke, sweating and crying, though I do not know why. My dream had been, from what I recall, fairly normal, when a huge shadow had abruptly fallen over everything. Literally, the second I opened my eyes, there came the knocking at my bedroom door. Not just normal knocking, though. This was truly frantic. "Who goes there?" I yelled. "Please, help us," it replied. I was surprised. It was the sadistic, angry voice that I remember from my father's shed on my 7th birthday, but it seemed genuinely sincere. There was a pained tone to it too, as though the speaker were grievously wounded. I actually found myself pulling back the sheets to get up, but I hesitated. I had never before been tempted to open the door. I suppose, as a child, I had so rigorously drummed into my head the idea that whatever lay beyond was evil, that it was just common sense. To be quite honest, I came very close to letting the thing into my room that morning. I held out in the end. It got worse. Just 2 days later, I was in my local corner shop. I'd just paid for a bottle of milk and a newspaper when a great force slammed against the shop door. Simultaneously, a voice began screaming, a long, keening squeal of pain. I whirled to face the door, but there were so many flyers plastered over the glass that I could only just make out the shape of a woman on the other side, slapping her palms against the window. The shopkeeper stared at me as though I were crazy. In the end, I asked if he had a bathroom I could use, murmured some half-thought-out excuse, and hid there for 10 minutes until the screaming stopped. There were 4 more incidents between then and now, a mixture of screams and tearful begging. The postman stopped by yesterday too. He knocked politely before sliding his usual letter through the letterbox. Then another, a total of 10 plain brown envelopes. The postman waited for a few minutes, knocking occasionally, and then he left me alone. Each letter contained a sheet of A4 paper, but somebody had taken a black pen to the pages, scribbling and shading them with such vigor that there were large tears around the center, and the edges were frayed. I shoved them back into their envelopes and tried to put it from my mind. Earlier, my bedroom door shook violently. It wasn't a scream, or a howl, or a roar that I heard, though. It was just crying. Dozens and dozens of voices sobbing quietly. Another blow struck my door. Plaster flaked from the walls and twirled to the carpet. Still no pleas or bargaining, just sobbing. Crash! I jumped up from my chair. Crash! A hairline crack split the frame of the door in one corner. My phone began to ring, and I heard a sharp rapping at the glass of my window, behind the curtains. I tried answering the phone, but it was simply yet more voices crying. Not even sobbing, though, more like bawling in terror and anguish. I hung up, but it kept ringing, so I took the battery out. I have shoved most of my furniture against the door and window. It has been 3 hours since this latest attempt at entry began. The battering has not abated, nor has the crying. I'm fairly sure that my door won't hold much longer. As for my mediocre barricade, it could be swept aside in 2 minutes. I find myself faced with the very real possibility of death, so I am writing this memoir of sorts, just in case something does happen. Crash. What do they want? Crash. Do they even want to hurt me? Crash. They seemed fearless, even malicious before. Crash. What could have driven them to this? Crash. Maybe I should open the door. Crash. Maybe I should let them in. Silence fell. I realized that even the crying had ceased. For a whole minute, I sat there. Then I got up and hurried to my door, eager to escape this claustrophobic situation. Perhaps I'd go outside, where I could be far away from any doors, and from the damned knocking. I pulled away my barricade and turned the handle. Locked. Kneeling, I peered through the keyhole. Beyond my bedroom door was not the corridor that I remembered, but another room, some kind of library or classroom, I think. It seemed unoccupied, but for one kid, sitting and reading with his back to me. I banged on the door. Hey kid, let me out. Okay? He glanced over his shoulder. Yeah, over here. Could you open the door, please? I can't. I'm in detention. I'm not supposed to talk to anyone. Go away. He turned from me. Confused and exasperated, I began to stand up. A loud bang shattered the silence once more. I realized it sounded like a fist being pounded against glass. My window! I heard it again. But this was not the frantic knocking of somebody wanting to get inside. This was not even an attempt to break in. Whatever was beyond the curtain and glass knew I was inside. It knew I was frightened. In the most predatory and sadistic way possible, it wanted me to be afraid. I turned back to the door and began hammering on it frantically. Hey, let me in, okay? I really need you to open the door. Our second tale closes, its echoes lingering like a chill. Now the page turns in silence. Anticipate, but don't presume, for the next story is shrouded in the tome's enigmatic depths. Cryptic Chronicles presents End of It All. The warnings first came through on social media. It was a fairly ordinary Sunday morning, as I sat behind the intriguing screen of my computer. For some many hours I had been checking my feed on Facebook when an article caught my eye. Now, I'm not some sucker who gets drawn to obviously fake messages spawned by trolls online. But hey, it was Sunday and I was bored. One of my friends had shared an article entitled The End, and if I had half my wits about me, then I wouldn't have even contemplated reading it. But I did, and that would soon become the most frightening mistake of my life. The article proceeded to explain how our world was coming to an end, and that the sun was going to devastate our planet. It urged everyone to seek shelter, although it would do no good. Of course, the comments were a mess of arguments and the occasional rant of someone who took the message way too seriously. Back then, I paid no mind to the useless article and had closed the tab almost as soon as I opened it. I can't recall the rest of that day, but I assume that it carried on as normal. The next day, however, was when things got slightly concerning. I'm not sure if it was all the talk about this message at school, but as soon as I got home, I decided to examine the website again. I had gotten to the bottom of the page when the number of viewership got my attention. Over 1 billion people had viewed the page-long article. I will admit that slightly freaked me out. I mean, 1 billion views. Was that even possible? And the most prominent question, why was everyone so interested in it? That was when I noticed that the TV was blaring out an emergency message. On the screen was a video of a man behind a pedestal, clad in a very smart suit. I had missed the majority of the broadcast, but I do remember the last part. He said, "Supernova, in our galaxy, only days away. There is no force on Earth that can stop nature from running its course. The end is near. God help us all." I remember standing there, my voice caught in my throat, and not being able to comprehend with the news. What were they talking about? It was only after I had searched endlessly online that the facts were clear to me. The sun was due to explode, and it was going to bring Earth down with it. Everybody was talking about this, and I'm not talking about a few million, I'm talking a few billion. I remembered the article linked from Facebook with its billions of views, and then I could comprehend. And boy, I did not take it well. I didn't have much time to sob and despair, as my dad had come rushing in. Imagine the talk we had. In the end, we thought it best to gather supplies and seek refuge in our fallout shelter, which Dad had gotten a few months ago. I offered to run to the store and gather food, although we all knew that this plan was futile. But we were desperate, and anything beat standing outside and waiting to die. I ran to the supermarket, my eyes clogged with tears and my face scrunched up in an expression of utter despair. When I arrived at the supermarket, I was swarmed by almost the whole suburb, who had gotten the same idea as well. It was only once I had gotten in the midst of the crowd that the fighting began. The store clerk had shut the doors, despite the amount of food left inside. People were rioting, throwing punches and practically killing each other. I had gotten several meters ahead when some guy turned on me and brandished a knife from his pocket. I couldn't understand what he said, but I knew he was demanding me to give him something. Money, perhaps, or food. I couldn't be sure, but the knife was definitely very intimidating. A loud bang came from behind me, and it was in that brief moment, when his gaze was averted elsewhere, that I seized my chance. I managed to wrestle the knife into my hands, and when he came running at me, I simply held it in front of me and allowed him to walk into it. I had never killed anyone before, but there he was, his eyes wide and his mouth gaping. He gave a slight choke, then slumped to the ground, dead. I don't know what came over me then, but I suddenly found a sense of survival. I used my knife to threaten people into giving me food, and usually it worked. I didn't want to waste what little time I had left cluttering about with a bunch of strangers when I could have been at home with my parents. One woman, when I asked for the cans she had stowed away in her bag, screeched and came at me, her arms flailing wildly. She too lay dead very soon. I don't know how many people I had to kill, but when I returned home, I was relieved that I had managed to scavenge some food. What I came home to was not something I had expected to find. My parents were sitting on the couch staring at the screen intently and holding back laughter. As I stepped into the room, I saw the headline on the news. End of the world statement, a hoax. Hackers arrested and awaiting trial. And it showed a video of several people in handcuffs. One of them, the man in the suit on the previous report. My parents were still clucking with slight laughter when they turned around to see me standing at the door, my hands and forearms soaked in fresh blood, with a knife in my hand and a backpack full of supplies. I began to laugh. Slowly at first, then progressively louder in pitch. I don't know why, but something about the whole scenario seemed just so amusing. My mum stifled a gasp at the sight of me, and I can tell you, their smiles soon faded after that. From third to fourth, the whispers wane. In the tome's embrace, we remain. A new tale stirs, a shadowed lore. Turn the page, what lies in store. Cryptic Chronicles presents Laughing Jack. It was a nice summer day. My 5-year-old son James was playing outside in the backyard of our suburban home. James has always been a quiet boy. He plays by himself mostly. He never had many friends, but he has always had a wild imagination. I was in the kitchen feeding our dog Fido when I heard what sounded like James talking to someone in the backyard. I'm not sure who it was he could be talking to. Could he have finally made a friend? Being a single mum, it's hard for me to always keep an eye on my son, so I decided to go outside and check on him. When I went into the backyard, I was a bit confused because James was the only person back there. Was he talking to himself? I could have sworn I heard another voice. "James, it's time to come inside," I called out to him. He came inside and sat down at the kitchen table. It was about lunchtime, so I decided to make him a turkey sandwich. "James, who are you talking to out there?" I asked. James looked up for a moment. "I was playing with my new friend," he said, smiling. I poured him some milk and continued to pry, as any good mother would. "Does your friend have a name? Why didn't you ask him to have lunch with us?" I asked. James stared at me for a moment before replying, "His name is Laughing Jack." I was a bit taken back by what he had said. "Oh, that's a strange name. What does your friend look like?" I asked, a bit confused. "He's a clown. He has long hair and a big swirly cone nose. He's got long arms and baggy pants with stripy socks, and he always smiles." I realized my son was talking about an imaginary friend. I suppose it is normal for kids his age to have imaginary friends, especially when he has no real kids to play with. It's probably just a phase. The rest of the day went by as per usual, and it was starting to get late, so I put James to bed. I tucked him in, gave him a kiss, and made sure to turn on his nightlight before I closed the door. I was pretty tired myself, so I decided to go to bed not long after. I had an awful nightmare. It was dark. I was in some kind of rundown amusement park. I was scared, running through an endless field of empty tents, broken down rides, and abandoned game huts. The whole place had a horrible look to it. Everything was black and white. The prize stuffed animals all hung from nooses in the game huts, all with sick grins stitched on their faces. It felt like the whole park was looking at me, even though there wasn't another living thing in sight. Then suddenly, I began to hear music play. The sounds of Pop Goes the Weasel being played on a squeeze box echoed through the park. It was hypnotizing. I followed its tune to the circus tent, almost in a trance, unable to stop my legs from moving forward. It was pitch black. The only light came from a single spotlight shining on the center of the big top. As I walked toward the light, the music slowed down. I found myself singing along, unable to stop. All around the mulberry bush, the monkey chased the weasel. The monkey, though, 'twas all in fun. The music stopped right before its climax, and suddenly the lights shot on. The intensity of the lights was practically blinding. All I could see was a small dark silhouette shuffle towards me. Then another one appeared, and another, and another. There were dozens of them, all coming toward me. I couldn't move, my legs were frozen, All I could do was watch as the haunting figures drew nearer. As they got closer, I could see they were children. As I looked at each one, I noticed they were all horribly disfigured and mutilated. Some had cuts all over their body, others were severely burnt, and others were missing limbs, even eyes. The children enveloped me, clawing at my flesh, dragging me to the ground and tearing inside me. As the children tore me apart and I faded away, all I could hear was laughter. Horrible, awful, evil laughter. I woke up the next morning in a cold sweat. After taking a few deep breaths, I looked over and saw that a few of James's action figures were positioned facing me on top of my nightstand. I sighed. James had probably woken up early and put these here. I gathered up the toys and made my way to James's room. However, when I opened the door, James was sound asleep. I just shrugged and placed the toys back into his toy box and headed out to the living room. A little while later, James woke up, and I made him his breakfast. He was quiet and seemed a bit groggy. Perhaps he didn't sleep well either. I decided to ask him about the toys. "James, honey, did you put the toys in Mommy's room this morning?" His eyes shot up at me for a moment, then quickly glanced back down at his cereal. "Laughing Jack did it." I rolled my eyes and responded, "Well, you tell Laughing Jack to keep the toys in your room." James nodded and finished up his breakfast, then decided to go play out in the backyard. I went to relax in the living room, and I must have dozed off, because I woke up a couple hours later. Shit, I need to check on James. I was a bit worried. It had been over 2 hours, and I haven't checked on him. I stepped out into the backyard, but James wasn't there anymore. I was getting nervous, so I called out to him, "James, James, where are you?" Just then, I heard a giggle come from the front yard. I rushed through the gate around to the front of the house. James was sitting on the sidewalk. I breathed a sigh of relief and walked over to him. "James, how many times have I told you to stay in the backyard? James, what are you eating?" James looked up at me, then reached into his pocket and pulled out a handful of hard candies in all colors. This made me very nervous. "James, who gave you that candy?" James just stared at me, not speaking. "James, please, tell Mummy where you got that candy." James hung his head down and said, "Laughing Jack gave it to me." My heart sunk. I kneeled down to look him in the eye. "James, I've had enough of this damn Laughing Jack thing. He is not real. Now this is a very serious situation, and I need to know who gave you the candy." I could see my son's eyes tear up, but Mama, Laughing Jack did give me the candy. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. James has never lied to me, but what he's telling me is impossible. I make him spit out the candy, and I throw the rest away. James appears to be fine. Maybe I'm just overreacting. After all, he could have gotten it from Tom and Linda from next door, or Mr. Walker down the street. Either way, I'm going to have to keep a closer eye on James. That night, I put James to bed as usual and decided to go to bed early myself. Suddenly, I was woken up by a loud bang coming from the kitchen. I sprung out of bed and hurried down the stairs. When I got to the kitchen, I was horrified. Everything on the counters had been thrown on the floor, and our dog Fido hung dead from the light fixture. His stomach was cut open and stuffed with candy, the same type that James was eating earlier that day. My shock was quickly broken by a sharp scream coming from James's room, followed by loud crashes. I quickly grabbed a knife from the drawer and moved up the stairs with the speed that only a mother whose child is in danger could have. I burst through the door and flicked on the lights. Everything in the room was knocked over and tossed on the floor. My poor son in his bed, crying and shaking with fear, a pool of urine staining the sheets. I scooped my child up and ran out of the house and went next door to Tom and Linda's house. Luckily, they were still awake. They let me use their phone, and I called the police. It didn't take them long to arrive, and I explained what had happened. They looked at me as if I were crazy. They searched the house, but all they found was a dead dog and 2 trashed rooms. The officer told me that someone had probably gotten into the house and done this right before making a quick escape when they heard me coming up the stairs. I knew it wasn't true. All the doors were locked and none of the windows were open. Whatever was in my house didn't come from outside. The next day, James stayed inside. I didn't want him to leave my sight. I went into the garage and found his old baby monitor and set it up in his room. If anything comes into his room tonight, I was going to be able to hear it. I went to the kitchen and grabbed the largest knife from the drawer and put it on my nightstand. Imaginary friend or not, I'm not letting anything hurt my little boy. Soon enough, night came. I put James to bed. He was afraid, but I promised him that I wasn't going to let anything happen to him. I tucked him in, gave him a kiss, and turned on the nightlight. Before closing the door, I whispered to him, "Good night, James. I love you." I tried to stay up as long as I could, but after a few hours I felt myself drifting off. My baby would be safe for the night, and I needed to sleep. Just as I lay my head on the pillow, I heard a soft noise come from the baby monitor I had put on my nightstand. At first it sounded like interference, like the kind a radio would make. Then it turned into a soft moan. Was James asleep? Then I heard it, the laugh from my nightmare, that horrible laugh. I sprung up from bed and grabbed the knife from under my pillow. I rushed over to James's room and creaked the door open. I tried the light switch, but it wouldn't come on. I took a step in, and I could feel the warm, thick liquid on my feet. Suddenly, James's nightlight came on, and I could see the absolute horror laid out in front of me. James's body was nailed up on the wall, the nails piercing through his hands and feet. His chest was cut wide open, and his organs hung down to the floor. His eyes and tongue had been removed along with most of his teeth. I was disgusted. I could hardly believe this was my baby boy. Then I heard it again, the soft, desperate moan. James was still alive. My baby, my poor baby, in so much pain, barely clinging to life. I ran across the room and vomited on the floor, but my sickness was interrupted by a horrible cackle coming from behind me. I spun around while still wiping bile from my mouth. Then out of the shadows emerged the fiend responsible for all this horror, Laughing Jack. His ghost-white skin and matted black hair hung down to his shoulders. He had piercing white eyes surrounded by dark black rings. His twisted smile revealed a row of sharp, jagged teeth, and his skin didn't look like skin at all. It almost looked like rubber or plastic. He wore a patchy black and white clown outfit with striped sleeves and socks. His body itself was grotesque, his long arms hanging down past his waist, and the way he was poised made him look almost boneless, like a rag doll. He let out a sickening laugh as if to let me know he was pleased with my reaction to his work. He then turned around slowly in front of James and began to laugh even more at the horrific sight he has laid out. That was enough to shake me from my terror. I snapped, "Get away from him, you bastard!" I rushed at the monster, raising the knife above my head, and stabbed down at him. But as soon as the knife touched him, he disappeared in a cloud of black smoke. The knife passed right through and pierced James's still beating heart, splashing the warm blood on my face. No! What have I done? My baby! I killed my baby! I immediately fell to my knees, and I could hear sirens in the distance growing louder. My boy, my sweet baby boy, I promised Mummy would protect you. But I failed. I'm sorry, James. I'm so sorry. Police soon arrived to find me in front of my son, still wielding the knife covered in my baby's blood. The trial was short. Insanity. I was placed in the Ferropolis house for the criminally insane, where I have been for the past 2 months. It's not so bad here. The only reason I'm awake now is because someone is playing Pop Goes the Weasel outside my window. I'll talk to the orderlies about it in the morning. The fourth's fright fades, its echoes hush. You've laughed in the face of the ghastly rush. But don't get smug, there's more in store. Cryptic Chronicles presents The Eighth Floor. I was staying at a hotel in Chicago, Illinois, during a business trip, and I was going to stay for the whole weekend. It was an older hotel, one that still used small keys rather than key cards to enter the rooms. I didn't mind. It seemed nice to get away from the onslaught of technology. When I checked into the hotel, it was packed full. A nasty storm had struck, standing many tourists and cancelling flights. No more rooms were available, and many people were being turned away because of the lack of vacancy. When I approached the front desk to check in, I noticed that all the keys for the rooms on the 8th floor were still on the wall. Not a single key was missing. It seemed odd that an entire floor would be vacant when so many people were all clambering to check in and get to their rooms. I could see the clerk was stressed out and he was ready to just give up and go home. So I tried to lighten the mood. Kind of weird, isn't it? "What is?" the clerk asked. "How everyone on the 8th floor is missing." The clerk gave me an odd look and his face paled. "What do you know about the 8th floor?" He replied in a serious tone. "What?" "Nothing," I answered honestly, a little embarrassed that my attempt to lighten the mood backfired. "I just noticed that all the keys for the 8th floor are still behind the desk." The clerk blushed a little and tried to laugh it off. "Oh yes, I see now." He went back to checking me in and handed me the key to my room on the 9th floor. "Enjoy your stay." "I will, thanks." I awkwardly accepted the key and grabbed my bag, heading for the elevator. Just like the lobby, the elevator was also packed. It was difficult to stand next to so many strangers so close by, let alone enter and exit the small car. I struggled to reach and press the button for the 9th floor, but I managed to see over the crowd of people and reach the button panel. It was then I noticed that the buttons seemed to be missing a floor number, 8. "That's funny," I thought out loud. "I wonder why there's no button for the 8th floor." But no one in the elevator reacted. They either didn't care or they were too preoccupied and didn't hear me. Once I finally got to my floor and checked into my room, I took a moment to relax and unwind on the bed. I had to give a presentation tomorrow and I needed to be alert. I decided to go to bed early that night and to practice my speech a few times to make sure I sounded confident. I took a shower, brushed my teeth, and stood in front of the bathroom mirror as I practiced my sales pitch a few times. A strange groaning sound from the room beneath me got my attention. It sounded like there was a man in pain or upset. I ignored it and continued to practice my speech. The groaning from the lower floor continued on, getting louder and louder by the minute. Angrily, I stomped on the floor as hard as I could and shouted out, "Hey buddy, are you okay?" There was no response. The groaning stopped. Satisfied that the man realized he was making too much noise, I continued to practice my speech. Just as I finished the first half of my speech, the groaning began again. But this time, it was much louder and angry. If this was going to go on all night, there was no way I'd be prepared for my presentation tomorrow. I knocked on my neighbor's door and was greeted with a grumpy response from a young woman and her new husband. "Excuse me," I politely tried to engage in conversation. "Do you hear that noise in the room below us?" "No." The woman sounded more confused than grouchy now. "We haven't heard anything until you pounded on our door." "Oh, sorry," I apologized, once again feeling embarrassed. Must be the pipes of something then. I tried to think of a possible alternate explanation, so I didn't seem like I was a crazy person. "Well, I'll call management then. Good night." The couple shut the door and locked it. I returned to my room, where the groaning noise continued. I picked up the phone on the small table next to the bed and called the front desk to complain about the noise. When I mentioned that it seemed to be coming from the room beneath me, a room on the 8th floor, the woman who answered the phone suddenly got quiet. "Sir, there is no one checked in that room. It must be someone on the 9th floor." "No," I tried to sound confident. "It's not coming from the walls. It's coming from the floor." "Well," the woman sounded rattled, and I could sense that she was trying to think of an explanation just to get me to hang up. "I'll call in the maintenance crew. It's probably a leaky pipe or a problem with the heating ducts." "Yeah, thanks." I hung up the phone not believing her for an instant. The groaning was growing louder and angrier by the minute. I put my hands to my ears to try and block the sound, but it wasn't enough. I walked back into the bathroom and turned on the shower and the sink full blast, hoping the running water would drown the noise, and it helped only a little bit. I sat on the bathroom floor, trying to think of a way to get some sleep, but I didn't have any other options. All the rooms were full. I couldn't request a new room, and there was no way another hotel would have vacancy during this storm. Suddenly, the pipes on the shower began rattling violently. The shaking was so strong that it caused the shower to sputter as it continued to run. The sound was like thunder inside the walls, and the thunder outside the hotel, as well as the pounding rain, sounded like there was a freight train barreling down the tracks right at me. I left my room, grabbing my key and my phone. I made my way to the elevator so I could lodge a complaint in the lobby. As soon as I stepped inside the elevator, I remembered that the 8th floor couldn't be accessed. The number was not an option, and I remembered that all the keys for the 8th floor were still behind the desk at the lobby. How could anyone check into a room on the 8th floor? Curious, I exited the elevator and made my way for the stairs. I walked down the stairwell from the 9th floor and directly onto the 7th. That's impossible, I told myself. I walked back up the stairs and double-checked the floor numbers. Sure enough, just like the elevator, there was no number 8. I walked up and down the staircase a few times, trying to figure out what was going on, when I noticed a small imperfection in the wall next to the doorway that led onto the 7th floor. I checked and realized that it was a gap. The gap was between a hidden door and its door frame. Using my fingertips, I pried the door open and found a small staircase leading back up one flight, up to the otherwise non-existent 8th floor. It was dark and dusty, like no one had used this passageway in years. I used the screen on my phone to light my way as I made way through up the secret stairs. There was another door at the top of the stairs. It wasn't sealed away or hidden. It was easily accessible. The door was numbered 8. Opening the door, I found myself on the 8th floor, and alone. I could just feel it. There was no one else on the floor with me. It was dark in the long hallway. Not even the exit signs were lit up. I continued to use my phone as I walked down the hallway, checking each door as I passed. They were all locked, that is, except for one door. The unlocked door was for the room directly beneath mine. I knocked once, just to make sure no one was secretly checked into the room, but no one replied. I opened the door, still trying to figure out why this door was unlocked, and found myself standing in a room that mirrored my own perfectly. The lights didn't work. I tried the switch a few times, but there was no power on this floor. "Hello?" I called out into the room. Is anyone in here?" Still no response. I went over to the phone and picked it up, but the line was dead. The amount of dust and cobwebs told me that no one was in this room, and no one had been for quite some time. But I still felt compelled to look around. I opened the door to the bathroom and was taken aback by what I saw in the room. There was a bathtub in the room, unlike mine which had a shower, and the tub was full of water. The water was at the top of the tub, threatening to spill over at any moment. I stepped closer, still using my phone to light my way, when I noticed a dark figure in the tub. It looked like a man, a dead man. Shining my phone over the tub, and I stared down into the still water, as if in a trance, trying to look at the man's dead face. As my senses slowly came back to me, the man's eyes opened, and he looked directly at me. I fell back on the floor, dropping my phone and losing my light. A splashing sound came from the tub, and I could feel cold water spilling onto the floor, soaking into my clothes. The sound of a heavy, wet footstep exited the tub. The second footstep was all the motivation I needed to get up and run. I bolted from the room, not caring about my phone or who the man was, and ran down the hall back to the door from whence I entered. I ran down the stairs, all the way down into the lobby, and didn't stop until I collided with the desk. Breathlessly, I tried to tell the clerk what I had seen, and that we needed to call the police. The clerk, who looked scared, not so much because there was a dead body in the hotel, but more like he was afraid of getting fired, escorted me to the manager's office behind the desk. "Sir," the clerk tried to sound calm and reassuring, "what did you see exactly?" I told him what I had seen and what I had heard. I showed him the wet spots on my clothes where the tub's water splashed on me. I didn't care if I got arrested for trespassing or for causing a disturbance. I had to tell someone what happened. The clerk listened intently to my story, not blinking, not looking away. When I finished, he got up and walked over to a large file cabinet. He opened an unmarked drawer and began thumbing through an extensive collection of files. Pulling a file from the drawer, he opened it up and pulled out a very old newspaper article. "Is this the man you saw?" he asked as he handed me the article. I looked at the clipping and felt my stomach drop. It was him. That was the man. The clerk sat down across from me and smiled a little. "You're not the first to see him." That was not the reaction I was expecting. Read the article, it should help clear things up. The article told the story of a man who had gone away on business and returned home to discover that his pregnant wife had been cheating on him and that the baby wasn't his. Heartbroken and betrayed, the man checked him into the hotel and never left his room. He was heard crying and wailing in heartbreak for 3 days before he finally stopped. When the maid entered his room to clean, she found his body in the bathtub. He had taken his own life, drowning himself after ingesting many sleeping pills. Is this why you don't let anyone check in on the 8th floor? Because of him?" I asked, feeling more at ease knowing that I wasn't crazy. "No," the clerk admitted. "He's only one of the reasons we don't let anyone check in on the 8th floor." What do you mean?" The clerk just smiled again. "You see that file cabinet?" "Yes." "And that unmarked drawer on the bottom?" "Yeah," I answered again. "What of it?" "That drawer contains every reason don't let anyone check in on the 8th floor. Ever since this hotel opened in 1873, we've had people die in very unusual ways, always on the 8th floor." "That's strange," I commented, feeling a little queasy. "What's stranger is the fact that no 2 deaths were the same, and no 2 deaths ever took place in the same room. Each room on the 8th floor has housed a tragic death, and each room has been reportedly haunted by the dead." That sent a shiver up my spine. "What? How? Are you telling me the 8th floor is cursed? Anyone who checks into a room is going to die or be haunted?" The clerk bowed his head. "It's not just the rooms that have seen death. Maintenance workers have died attempting simple repairs. One man was electrocuted trying to fix the lights. Another fell down the elevator shaft to his death. A maid was found dead, hanging by her neck at the end of the hallway." I sat in transfixed fear at the story the clerk had just told me, and I didn't want to believe it. "But shouldn't we call the police? I saw a body." "Everyone does," the clerk explained. "Even the police have seen the bodies, but have never been able to explain the situations." I didn't know what to do. It was late, I was exhausted, and I didn't want to cause any more disturbances. Reluctantly, I returned to my room. I took the elevator and held my breath as the car passed by the sealed-off 8th floor. As I approached my room, I saw something on the wet floor outside my door. It was my phone. As we close the cover on Volume 4 of The Dark Tome, we leave behind the whispers and shadows that have haunted our journey. Through tales of terror and the unknown, we've travelled together, each story a step deeper into the cryptic abyss. If these narratives have stirred the ghostly imaginations within you, show your support by liking and subscribing to Cryptic Chronicles. Your engagement helps us bring more of these chilling sagas to life. And before you retreat into the safety of the light, stay with us a moment longer. There's a special treat awaiting those who dare to linger in the dark.
Ancient book of whispers calls calls out my name. Soaked in fear, every page drips the same. Dark tome in the crypt filled with dread. Evil lives in the words that are said. Shadows dance as I turn each old page. Tales of horror locked in a cursed cage. Cold stone walls echo screams of the damned. No escape from the grip of the hands. Terrifying tales haunt my dreams. Crypt of nightmares, endless screams. From the dark tome, fear it speaks. Every word just cuts so deep. Ghostly fingers trace over my heart. Steals my breath, ripping me apart. Ink of blood and tears stains the scroll. Stories of madness consuming the soul. Whispered secrets from forgotten graves. Ancient curses no one can save. Eyes of terror in the shadows stare. Drawing me into the lair of despair. Tormented cries in the dead of night. Lost forever in the pebble light. Darkness won't let me free. Bound in chains to its cruel symphony. Streaks over my heart, steals my breath, ripping me apart. Ink of blood and tears stains the scroll. Stories of madness consuming soul. Whispered secrets from forgotten graves. Ancient curses no one can save. Eyes of terror in the shadows stare, drawing me into the lair of despair.